Josh Wilker, welcome to the Bookshelf Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ron. It's great to be here.
So, I read your book, Cardboard Gods, an All American Tale Told Through Baseball Cards, when it first came out. It's hard to believe it's been more than 15 years since this came out.
Yes, to me too. Yeah.
One of the things I wondered, because this is a very revealing book, a very personal book. It's not a typical book about, rating the players or anything. It's one of the things that struck me is it's almost like a Rorschach test. You open your pack of cards, you see the players, and it evokes certain feelings, certain memories. One of the things I wonder, I mean, as myself, I look back on some of the things I've written years ago and wonder how I would write it now. Do you ever look back on things you've written and think like that?
Uh, yeah, in a way I do. I mean, I think I look back at things I've written, um, and I don't feel a strong connection to them in a strange way, um, because I kind of lived through them, and I can't experience them the way I experienced them when the writing was coming out of me, when it was like everything in my whole being was going into those words. Um, and now I think about it differently, and I'm a different person in some ways. In some ways, I'm exactly the same. But since that book came out in 2010, I became a father. So that was a whole new chapter in my life, that has completely changed things around and changed the way I write, in a lot of ways. And if I was to, I still do write about baseball cards more occasionally now, but it does feel a little different, the way that I write about them. And also, I think when I was writing about them for that book, I was really driven to tell the story of my life growing up, and use baseball cards to do that. And once I did that, it's a little different coming back to the baseball cards. I still will write about my past, um, but it doesn't have that same driving momentum that it did when I was first writing about those cards.
Now, you write about the cards on uh, cardboardgods.net.
Yes.
Uh, do you still have those cards?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The I have all my cards from when I was a kid. Um, so all the cards that I wrote about in the book, all the cards that got into the book, they have a special. I made little packs for them, so they have sort of special area of importance, I guess, in my collection. But otherwise, I keep my cards the way I did as a kid, sorted into teams. Um, and this might sound awful to people who really take care of their cards, which I respect completely. But to me, I just take care of them the way I did as a kid. So they're wrapped in rubber bands
Hmm.
still, and easily accessible. And I still pull them out and look at them and play with them and decrease the value of them.
When I was collecting cards, it was before the investment, the monetary investment for the future of these
Mhm.
cards. And I recently bought a copy of Beckett's because I still have a trove of them in the attic, and I was just curious to see what some of these things might be worth. And I think I spent more on the book than the cards would be worth right now. You wrote about that toward the end of the book. You write about going to the storage facility where you kept them and finding them again, and that must have been a very emotional moment. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so that's yeah. The cards, like I said, the cards are with me now, but there was a time in my life when I was separated from them. And in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that long a bit of amount of time. But as a young adult, uh, the years seem longer. So yeah, it felt like I had been completely removed from my childhood. Um, and so finding the cards again was like a portal back into childhood. And it was very powerful. And I think I started writing about them just in notebooks pretty soon after that. And this was long before the book came out. So it was just part of my writing practice was to just reconnect to those cards and reconnect to my childhood more and start seeing it more. And so that was, yeah, it was very, very powerful.
Well, you've been writing about the website is almost 20 years old at this point.
Yeah. Yes, that's a strange thing to think about that it's um because at the time when I started it was a blogging was still kind of new.
Hmm.
Um and the way time is moving for me now is that I don't really even notice the passing of the years and then see that so much time has gone past. It still feels like a new technology. It's completely not. um but yeah, it's that was really important to me in terms of I in terms of my writing career, such as there was no writing career at that point. Really, I'd written books, some nonfiction books for like middle school readers,
Hmm.
and those had been published. But I had dreams of writing my own story in some way or another, and I'd been unable to do that. I'd written a novel that was sort of covering similar terrain to what I covered in Cardboard Gods, and I wasn't able to sell that, and I was sort of discouraged. I was like, I don't know what to do now. Well, I guess I'll just keep writing about these baseball cards and playing around with them. And the blog gave me um, an avenue to do that in a way that theoretically could connect with some other people, and they could read it, and it would be very immediate that way. That's what happened. People, I did start to have a few people start to read it, and then a few more, and that kind of really helped spur me on to keep writing about them, was getting that connection with readers, which was so really so amazing.
It must
And to
feel
see,
very
yeah,
validating and allows you to move forward rather
yeah,
than saying, well, I've been wasting my time doing this. But
yeah.
how old is your child now?
Well, so I've got two, and they are 11 and 8. Oh, sorry. Oh my God.
Uh-oh.
they're they're 12 and 9. Yeah, I need to have that written down. Yes, 12 and 9. Yeah, great boys. Not that into baseball.
Okay.
So that's been interesting to navigate. I think I had sort of imagined like, well, I'm going to pass these cards down to my
Mhm.
sons, which I will, but they're going to be like, well, what do we do with these? Um, so they're into other things.
Hey, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm working on a project about baseball cards myself, and I went to a store in town. I found on the website that had, I won't say advertised, but supposedly they sold baseball cards. That's the reason I went to that store. And I got there, and they said, "Oh no, we stopped selling baseball cards a few years ago because there just isn't the interest anymore, and
Mm.
it literally doesn't pay for them to order the cards and just have them sit around
Oh,
because people aren't buying them." Uh, when you and I were young, we used to go to the corner store, the general store, put down a
mm,
quarter, buy a pack, open it up, chew the gum or not chew the gum. Uh, and now it's if you want to buy, you buy a set. You buy a. I haven't seen any stores locally that sell individual packs of baseball cards anymore.
yeah.
I find that a little disappointing, but I understand. I have a friend at work who has a 10-year-old son that has very little interest in baseball because there are so many other diversions these days. It's just
Mhm.
even playing baseball, there are other diversions, so you don't have kids playing as much ball as he used to. When I was a kid, you just used to go down to the park any afternoon and you find kids to play with. And
Mhm.
now, when we moved to this town, I would go pass by parks and see all these empty diamonds. No one is using them, and it was so disappointing to me because even as an adult, well into my 30s, I was still looking for pickup games to play.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little sad to me. It's, I'm because it was such an important part of my childhood. It was everything. It was really took up so much of the space of my mind thinking about baseball. And it was a lot of it was based on imagination at that time too. Because it's not like I wasn't watching a ton of games living in rural Vermont. So the baseball cards were a way for me to imagine the game, and help and stay connected to it. Yeah, and I see with my kids, they have a lot of other options
Mhm.
um, for their time and for their imagination, and it's just not. Baseball's a complicated sport. Like when I try to tell them about it, their eyes kind of start to glaze over. I think you really need to be driven to it, and I'm sure there still are. I mean, I see, there's a lot of kids still playing little league and stuff, so it's happening. Um,
Have you
but
ever heard from any of the players you've written about?
Well, I mean, one of the most amazing things that happened um, as a result of the book was that I did an event, a signing for the book at the souvenir shop outside of Fenway Park,
Mhm.
and the editor of the book, Pete Fornatel, um, somehow had a connection some way to Bill Lee and got Bill Lee to also come to that event and sit next to me and sign books of Cardboard Gods
Mhm.
with me. And he had read the book, so that connection was forged actually earlier. I think he had a blurb on the book, which was amazing. But getting to meet him was a highlight of my life. I mean, he was as a Red Sox fan growing up, I was a huge fan of his. Um, and as sort of a hippie leaning youth, I was also a fan of his. Um, and he did not disappoint. He was a really warm, hilarious guy, and just wanted to hang out. After the signing, we went and watched the game together at Fenway Park, and so that was beautiful. So that's the best connection I've had. I haven't had very many other connections. I did hear secondhand from somebody that they had heard from Daryl Cheney
Mm, mhm.
that he didn't like one thing I wrote about him well on my blog. So, but I didn't really write anything about him. I look back at the post. It was one of these posts that I write every once in a while where I'm kind of getting down on myself and I'm just using the baseball card to beat on
Right,
myself a bit.
right.
And so that's what I was doing. But I was using some colorful language. And I think Daryl Cheney is I'm not sure about this. I think he's a devout religious man,
Okay.
maybe. And so I think he saw that, he saw his name attached to it, and he was like, "This is terrible."
Uh,
And I do feel bad about that. And that's actually, after I heard about that, I think I've changed a bit about how I write about the cards. I try to be respectful. Even I try to avoid like even like indirectly being disrespectful of the players. Where I think when I was first writing about them, my approach was just like, I'm playing with these cards. They're my cards, and I'm going to play with them however I want. But they are people who are on those cards after all. So yeah, so that was one connection I had afterward that made me think a bit.
but that's interesting. That goes back to the question I had about how you look at the book now, having
Mhm.
written it like all those 15 years ago is like almost half
Yeah,
a lifetime to a lot of
yeah,
people. And sure, you've grown since then. You have different ideas than you did at the time. Uh, One of the things you're right about is the relationship you had with your older brother, and it must be hard. I did not have uh, a brother growing up, so I didn't have anyone to bounce things off of, and uh, subsequently, I didn't have the disappointment in the relationship that eventually changes as he grows and older and hangs with his friends, and you're kind of left behind. But I understand how difficult that must have been.
yeah. That definitely was. He was. I always looked to him. Um, the childhood that I write about in that book, it was sometimes kind of chaotic, uh, and I think I looked whenever it felt sort of out of control and chaotic. I looked to him for stability and um, and just forged a really powerful bond to him. I mean, also we were growing up in rural Vermont, so a lot of times we just had each other,
Mhm.
and uh, as I think that was. I can see that with actually with my sons now, is that with the older one, sometimes it can be a bit of a burden to have a younger one always wanting to play with you. And so I think that's how it was for my brother. And certainly when he became a teenager, it was like, all right, enough already. You're kind of cramping my style.
Right.
But uh, that was a tough one for me to handle. Um, yeah, for sure.
Hmm. This sounds like it was very cathartic writing experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. I you know, yeah, I think I was driven for a long time to try to make sense um of my childhood, and because I was also drawn to writing, I was drawn to making sense of it in writing, and it took me a long time to find a form with which to do that. And once I was able to bring the element of play into it, where I wasn't trying to be too serious, I wasn't trying to be too literary. Once I just started playing around with it, that opened it up and made it come alive in a way that I could then kind of move through it, and get to that, I guess, that kind of catharsis um, that you mentioned. Because it does feel like um, that time is more settled for me now than it was, and I think it's because I was able to shape it into a story. Although the weird thing about the past is that it always keeps changing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm I'm in like many people in therapy, and so still revisiting some of that stuff to kind of work it out. But I think I did take a step forward um, in some ways in writing that book, and it allowed me to kind of move on.
One of the subjects that has always interested me is memory
Mhm.
and the way we look back now on things that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. Uh, I mean, I'm certainly no expert on memory, but they talk about how it changes over time. And the way you think things happen may not have been the way things happen. That's always the case. I want to talk a little bit about the practicalities of writing. When you were writing Cardboard Gods, were you showing it to anybody? Were you getting any feedback on it?
Well, so it was kind of like a three pronged process in a way. Like I started writing about it just by myself alone in notebooks. And those are just my personal way of starting to work things out. Then when I started working with the blog, it was kind of a way of um, like when I hear stand-up comedians talk about how they do their work, they just go out into a club and start trying out jokes and see how they land. And I think I was using the blog to see kind of what connected, what had some life in it, because you could see, I could tell just from comments and from the amount of views I was getting on the blog, like what was working and what wasn't. And that probably helped direct me a little bit in terms of how I was figuring out the story. Um, and from pretty early on with the blog, I was like, oh, this is going to be a book, thinking about that in my mind. And then when I was able to sell the idea of a book to an editor, to a publisher, I started working with that editor. I mentioned him before, Pete Fornatel, great editor, also a great writer. Um, and so at that point I started sharing drafts, and he would um, give feedback on that and help me shape the book. And it's a beautiful thing when you can get with an editor um, who supports you, who's not overly determinative about anything, but kind of asks good questions and helps open things up that way. And that's what Pete was doing for me with Cardboard Gods for sure.
You have written other books about baseball. You've written a book about the Bad News Bears in breaking
Mhm.
training. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that came to me. There was series editor of that series of books about movies. Was getting to its feet. His name was Sean Howe, and he reached out to me. He was a fan of the blog and of Cardboard Gods, the book, and wanted to see if I was interested in writing a book for the series. I think what he asked me was like, "Is there a movie you'd like to write about?"
Hmm.
And I listed about 6 or 7 movies, and they were all really kind of serious classics, Taxi Driver and other movies like that, where I was, I guess, probably trying to show my film bona fides or something. And then I also threw in Bad News Bears and Breaking Training because that was a favorite of mine as a kid. And he was like, "Oh, that's the one. That's the one you
Uh,
should write about." And
uh-huh.
he was right. He was definitely right. It was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun to work on and to write. And and it allowed me to kind of just extend writing about the 70s that I'd been doing. That was part of Cardboard Gods for sure, was like writing about that era in American society and also in baseball. And so it allowed me to kind of write about that some more. And and just kind of write about a movie that was clearly not a classic, but a classic to me. So it was a because I saw it when I was a kid, and I actually saw it before I saw the first Bad News Bears movie, which is key, I
Hmm.
think, because I've talked to other people like Dan Epstein, the author of a couple of, well, three now, I think, great books about the 70s,
Sure.
70s baseball and other stuff. And he had seen Bad News Bears first, and so Bad News Bears and Breaking Training was a horrific betrayal, and he hated it, which I can understand. But I saw it first, and for me, it was like the dream. It was my dream. Would be to go off with my little league team and just set off on a road trip and just play baseball all along the way, go to the Astrodome
Sure.
and play there. So yeah, it was a way for me to kind of talk about that kind of dream and uh, and have a lot of fun with it.
And more recently, Benchwarmer and American Dad's, sorry, Almanac of Fatherhood and Other Failures. So another personal book.
Yes, that was more right. That book kind of talked about the big change that I've gone through over the last several years now of becoming a father. And for me, the way I understand the world is through sports and sports fandom. And so it was a way for me to work through um, what I found. I don't, not everybody finds it this way, but I found the transition to fatherhood very challenging.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
it was great. It was great. I mean, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me, but I came to it kind of late. So I was sort of set in my ways in a lot of ways, and those ways were not so conducive necessarily to always be caring for another human being. And so the the upheaval of that is what I was grappling with in that book, and I was using the framework of like an encyclopedia of sports failure as a way to work through my first period of time as a new father.
Are you working on anything now?
Yeah, I'm it's I've been working on a novel for uh I hate to say it, several years now. It's finally starting to uh go from just a chaotic mess to something that seems to have some shape to it. So I'm guardedly hopeful that I'll be able to have something to share with the world pretty soon. Um I can't I don't it 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 never goes really well for me to talk about something that's kind of in
Understand.
progress.
Understand.
Yeah, but it is another. I am realizing like, wow, I always use sports to grapple with the world. So it's not strictly speaking a sports novel, but it definitely is more of my style of like ha trying to grab a handle on the world through sports.
I just wanted
So
to touch quickly the title of Cardboard Gods. I'm trying to not grapple, not reconcile, but what exactly do you mean by cardboard gods? Are they gods to you because they, when you were a kid, these were ball players, or as an
mm.
adult, do you realize that cardboard is so ephemeral that it's not, it's kind of like not real?
Ron, I'll leave it to you to ask that question as the baseball book maestro. It's funny, nobody's ever asked me that, and I've always when I hit on that title, I was happy with it because I think it just the way you said in that question, it's kind of both things. I mean, that was my religion
Mhm.
for sure, um, but also kind of flimsy. Like it's a flimsy thing to be putting all your hopes and dreams on these cards, on these figures that don't know you, um, and it's just it's also kind of in this world, for me anyway. There's not a lot of stability, um, so it was a kind of potent metaphor for what we have to rely on in this world is not always um, ironclad. Yeah.
Well, on that happy note, we've been talking with we've been talking with Josh Wilker, author of Cardboard Gods, an all-American tale told through baseball cards. Josh, thank you very much for talking with us today. Good luck on your
Thank
new
you.
project, and I hope to be reading more of you on the blog.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks so much.